I'm Catherine Walsh, 26 years old, and my MBA graduation day was supposed to be the proudest moment of my life, until the microphone ended up in my uncle's hands. People often think the biggest shocks come from accidents, failures, or breakups, but for me, it came from my own family. From a blood relative standing up in front of a crowd and exposing the secret I had kept hidden for the past 2 years. Right at the moment I was about to be honored as valedictorian, and in less than a minute the entire auditorium fell silent, then burst into laughter. At that moment, I was standing on stage at Richmond Business School during the 2023 graduation ceremony. Everything was going according to plan. Music played, stage lights beamed. I held my diploma tightly, smiling with confidence. Then my uncle, Anthony Miller, 58 years old, dressed in a gray suit and dark purple tie, suddenly stepped forward. With a twisted smile and breath heavy with alcohol, he snatched the microphone from the dean. How shameful for the Miller family. His voice hit me like a slap. This girl, scrubbed toilets in a third-rate hotel to pay for school. What are you clapping for? Disgrace? I stood frozen on stage, palms icy, ears ringing. Whispers rose from the VIP section, where my parents and relatives sat. I saw my cousin Rachel leaning back, laughing out loud while my mother lowered her gaze, pretending not to hear. No one stopped Uncle Anthony. No one said a word. Just when I thought everything had collapsed, the dean gently gestured for me to stay. And then he said, "We have a special guest today." And when a man in a black suit, familiar face, holding a bouquet of flowers stepped onto the stage, every eye locked onto him. Because that was my husband. The man my family didn't even know existed. From the outside, the Millers looked like the perfect model of an American upper-class family. A stately mansion in the suburbs of Charleston, South Carolina, with a lawn trimmed to perfection, family portraits by the fireplace, everyone smiling like something out of a lifestyle magazine. But the truth inside that house, a never-ending performance. My father, Edward Miller, was the chairman of Miller Capital, who always forced me to follow the blueprint he designed. "You were born to do great things. Millers don't bow their heads," he would hiss whenever I brought home a 97 instead of a 100. My mother, Margaret, always said, "You are the mirror of this family. Don't do anything that gives people reason to whisper." But she never once asked what I actually wanted. I grew up like a wax statue. Beautiful, polished, but cold and lifeless. Any deviation from the plan was treated as betrayal. I remember once asking to major in art instead of economics, and my father smashed a framed picture in my room and shouted, "You plan to paint your way to starvation? Don't make this family a joke in the financial world." I froze, my chest tightening like a stone pressing down. But that was nothing compared to the day I rejected Wharton, the school generations of Millers had attended. I chose Richmond, a decision my father called a slap to our ancestors' faces. "I won't pay a dime. You want independence? Fine, get out of this house tomorrow morning. Earn your own living, Catherine." "Fine," I said, trembling. "I don't need anyone to buy me prestige." That night, I packed in silence. No one came to see me off. Not a single look held me back. I left that house like a disgrace. But for the first time in my life, I could breathe. From that day on, the Millers cut me off from every party, every inheritance list, every invitation. But I cut them out of my life too. Not because I hated them, but because I needed freedom to find out who I really was. I didn't leave my parents' house to chase freedom. I left to escape the golden cage they had locked me in for the first 22 years of my life. The day I declared I would attend Richmond, the entire family froze. Like I had just brought home a drug-addicted boyfriend. My father went cold, pushed aside his porcelain plate and spoke slowly. "You're a Miller. There are no choices, only legacy." My mother smirked. Only a child desperate for attention would turn down Wharton. I didn't need attention. I needed to breathe on my own, fall on my own, grow on my own. Richmond wasn't on my family's list of acceptable schools. It was a top private university in the Southeast, known for its practical programs, not its ivy-covered walls or its dynastic alumni. I knew choosing it meant forfeiting all financial support, connections, and family reputation. But it was the first decision I ever made without asking permission. But it was the step I made for her. I rented a tiny attic apartment on the third floor of an old building in downtown Nashville, Tennessee. Sweltering in the summer. Shared bathroom, a 2-burner electric stove, but I held the key myself. And I lived on money I earned. The savings from a few summer internships covered my first semester's tuition. But to survive, I worked at a fast food joint during the day, cleaned hotel rooms at night. I didn't complain. Every stain I scrubbed, every table I served, was a quiet rebellion against the cold stone walls of the Miller estate. "You'll fail and come crawling back," my father had once said that. I remember his words, every syllable, but I chose to remember them not out of anger, but to prove I can rewrite the Miller legacy with my own hands, not through them, not through the name, through me. Freedom brought breath. But the first week in Nashville, I learned 3 things. 1. The cheapest sandwich can destroy your budget. 2. Without AC, July turns an attic into an oven. 3. No one cares that you were a rich kid if you're sweating in a job application line. My first job was at a 24/7 pancake diner on Elmhurst Avenue, night shift 6 p.m. to midnight. After 1 week of standing 8 hours straight, my feet blistered, my shoulders stiffened like stone, and the phrase, "Table 7 wants extra syrup," echoed in my sleep. I wanted to quit, but I had $68.00 left in the bank. Quitting meant hunger. During the day, I attended classes. In the afternoons, I cleaned short-term rental rooms at a small hotel near the bus station. The job was dirtier than I expected. Bloodstains, torn towels, mildew that clung like the family's judgment. Some nights, I curled up in the corner of my room, eating instant noodles and staring out the dusty window, empty inside. In those moments, I whispered to myself, "No one's coming to save me, no one's pulling me down either. I stand, I fall, I crawl up myself." While classmates planned Florida vacations, I counted coins to fill the tank of a borrowed car. While they partied at student mixers, I scrubbed toilets in room 212, trying to clean coffee-stained sheets. I never imagined I'd live like this, but I never felt more real. Every dollar I earned, every scrape on my hand, every sleepless night. They didn't break me. They built a new me. No longer Catherine Miller, heiress of the wealthy family. I am Catherine Walsh. Rebuilding myself, from the ground up, with bare hands and an unyielding heart. That was the night I got my first shift in the emergency ward at St. Helens Hospital. Unlike the hotels I used to clean, there was no quiet hour here. Just sirens, antiseptic, and fluorescent lights burning through eyelids swollen from exhaustion. I had just finished cleaning the nurse's break room when a deep voice spoke behind me. "New here? Use the blue disinfectant, not the red. The red makes the floors slippery as ice." I turned. A tall man with tousled hair, wearing a light gray maintenance uniform. His name tag read, Dylan Carter. "Thanks, but I'm not here to slip and die," I replied, still holding the mop. He smirked. Not with sarcasm, not with pity, just the kind of smile from someone who knew what it felt like to be so tired you forgot your own name. "I'm Catherine," I said, "and if you're testing my skills, I can clean both an operating room and a boardroom." Dylan chuckled. "Then I'll let you handle the OR. I'm still training myself to survive the board of directors." From that night on, we began sharing sleepless shifts. I mopped floors, he replaced light bulbs, fixed leaking pipes, sometimes helped nurses push stretchers when they were short-staffed. During brief breaks, he handed me a cup of coffee from his old metal thermos. "Homemade," he said. "Bitter like the truth, but it keeps you awake." We didn't talk much, but in that silence there was a kind of understanding deeper than any speech. One night, when I collapsed over a medical waste bin from exhaustion, Dylan sat down beside me, didn't ask anything, just handed me a neatly folded tissue and said softly, "It's okay to be tired. It's okay to fall, as long as you stand up again in the morning." At that time, I didn't know much about him, only that in the middle of cold nights and crushing pressure, there was someone who didn't look at me with pity, but with quiet recognition. And that started to change everything. I don't know when love arrived. I just knew that every time I walked into the third-floor hallway and saw Dylan crouched down checking the circuit breaker, my heart skipped a beat. We didn't have roses or candlelit dinners. We had lukewarm coffee, the hum of suction machines from the ER, and flickering fluorescent lights on the ceiling. At first, I called it night shift camaraderie. But over time, the distance between our coffee cups grew shorter. Our glances lingered longer, and the smallest stories, about his childhood in Michigan, the first time he fixed a bike using rubber bands, suddenly felt incredibly important. One October night, I was cleaning the waiting room windows when Dylan walked in, holding a cup of coffee and a brown paper bag. "Found a 24-hour bakery. They've got cinnamon-filled donuts," he said, placing the bag beside me. "How long have you known I like that flavor?" I squinted at him. He didn't answer, just smiled and looked away. I didn't press, because I also knew little things about him. The way he furrowed his brows when thinking, how he always flexed his fingers before fixing something, and that he never forgot to carry spare tissues. We kept everything hidden from the outside world, not out of shame, but because my world, with powerful relatives and the Miller name as heavy as a chain, would never accept a relationship that wasn't well matched, and he didn't want to be the reason I had to choose. "I don't need to go public, as long as you know who you're walking beside," Dylan once said, when I dodged a classmate's question about the guy who keeps texting you at night. I nodded, but my chest felt like it was being squeezed. Our love was like a song playing through earbuds in a noisy hospital. No one else could hear it, but it kept me going through every exhausting night. We made no promises, no big declarations, but I knew if the world ever fell apart, he'd be the one I'd want to hold on to when I stood back up. I used to think success was that moment on the podium, being handed a trophy surrounded by applause. But in reality, it came quietly on a morning when I opened the fridge and saw milk. Not the cheapest one on the shelf. Whole milk, real, bought with my own money after I'd paid that semester's tuition. I looked at the bottle, then laughed like a fool. That was the week I received the community scholarship offer. The Bryson Grant, covering 60% of tuition for students with financial hardship and outstanding performance. When I read the acceptance email, I had to reread it 3 times. My hands trembled. My eyes stung. I jumped out of bed in the middle of the night and called Dylan. "I don't have to work 3 extra shifts a week anymore," I choked out. "So you'll be having proper breakfasts now? Not just one, a whole month of them." That was also the first week I topped the class in applied economics. Professor Rubin invited me to join his research group. He didn't know my name, didn't care where I came from, he just saw my scores and my presentation, and nodded. For the first time in months, I slept a full 6 hours without setting an alarm for a night shift. I woke up to sunlight through the window, not the garbage truck outside. One Sunday morning, Dylan brought over a box of pastries and said, "Congratulations, Bryson Scholar." I gave him a playful glare. "I'm just getting started." He winked. "But you're starting in the right direction." I looked around my tiny kitchen, still peeling paint, still the same old wooden table, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer running from the Millers, no longer just scrubbing toilets to survive. I was moving forward, no one pulling me, no one pushing, just me. And I wasn't hungry anymore. I never imagined graduation day, the one I dreamed about for 3 years, would turn into a knife in the back, right under the stage lights. The ceremony was held in the Grand Hall of Richmond University, chairs lined up neatly, Crimson backdrop behind the stage printed with, "Class of 2023, proud of you." I sat in the front row, gown crisp, Dean's Honor Medal cold against my chest. In the crowd, I saw my parents, Edward and Margaret Miller, seated in the VIP section. Stiff, distant. Only my grandmother clapped sincerely when my name was called. Just as the dean stepped up to the microphone and said, "We are proud to recognize the top academic performer of this graduating class, Catherine Walsh." I rose, hands cold but steps steady. Everything seemed on track, until my uncle Charles Miller suddenly marched toward the stage. No one stopped him in time. "Wait," he boomed, snatching the microphone from the dean. "I'm this girl's uncle, and I can't stand by while the truth is hidden." I froze. The hall went silent. Everyone's applauding this academic star? She's the daughter of the prestigious Miller family, and instead of attending Wharton, she left home to mop hospital floors and wait tables in cheap diners? That's the kind of success you're celebrating? Whispers erupted. I scanned the familiar rows. My mother fiddled with her dress. My father stared at the ground. No one stood up for me. She rejected a brilliant future just to play the victim. "Don't be fooled by this performance," Charles shouted, face flushed, hand trembling as he pointed straight at me. I didn't move, didn't lower my head, but it felt like all the blood drained from my body. Just when I thought I'd collapse, the dean took back the microphone, expression steady. "At Richmond, we don't judge by pedigree. We honor those who stand tall, even when pushed down by their own families." And at that exact moment, from the entrance of the auditorium, Dylan appeared. No maintenance uniform this time. He wore a black suit, eyes locked on me. And the entire room held its breath. The auditorium doors still trembled slightly as Dylan stepped in. The charcoal gray suit hugged the same frame I used to see in a maintenance uniform. But his gaze, calm, sharp as a blade, wasn't that of a man who came to stay quiet. The dean paused just in time, his eyes shifting toward Dylan, as if he'd been expecting him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said clearly, "we have a special guest today who requested to speak at this recognition ceremony. The newly appointed Chief Operating Officer of the St. Helens Health System, Mr. Dylan Carter." I went numb. The hall erupted in whispers. My uncle, Charles, gaped like he had swallowed a brick. Dylan walked toward the stage, each step deliberate and steady. He looked at me, an unspoken embrace in his eyes, then turned to face the hundreds watching. "I'm Dylan Carter, and yes, I'm the person just described as a janitor who takes out the trash." He paused. The room went dead silent. "Yes, I used to work night shifts. I used to mop the ER floors, not because I failed, but because I chose to understand every corner of the system I would one day lead." Dylan turned to my uncle. "Mr. Miller called Catherine a disgrace to the family for doing manual labor? I'm sorry, but it was from those hospital floors that she built the research on medical supply chains that we now apply across the entire system." He stepped forward and stood next to me. "She didn't use the Miller name to climb up. She used her intellect, her endurance, and a kind of courage most of you have never had to call on." The entire auditorium froze. "And if anyone wants to know more, yes, Catherine is my wife. We got married last year, quietly, among mops and night shifts." The shock hit the VIP row like a punch. My mother gripped the armrest tightly. My father lowered his head. Dylan ended with a low voice. "If today is about achievement, then let's get the name right, Catherine Walsh. A woman who didn't need to be lifted up because she stood up on her own when her whole family turned away." Applause exploded. No one laughed. No one sat. The entire auditorium rose for me. I was still standing there, right in the middle of the stage, when the dean stepped beside me and placed a hand on my shoulder, like a father who rarely showed emotion. "Miss Walsh, if you're ready, this is your moment." I nodded. By then my heart no longer trembled. I was no longer afraid of shame or of judging eyes. I just felt calm. I walked to the microphone, my low heels striking steady beats on the wooden floor. My name is Catherine Walsh, but perhaps in many minds I'm still Catherine Miller, the granddaughter of a family that just publicly disowned me. A few whispers. I didn't pause. I used to think if I studied hard enough, behaved long enough, stood tall long enough, then family love would come. I was wrong. My eyes swept the VIP row. They looked away, but I didn't anymore. I don't need a title to be respected. I need the truth to be spoken. That some children don't choose whose house they're born into, but they have the right to choose a life that doesn't resemble it. I gently removed the medal from my chest and held it up before the crowd. I don't wear this medal for them. I wear it for every night I collapsed after double shifts. For every morning I woke up with an empty stomach and still showed up to class on time. For everyone out there fighting silently, without powerful relatives or a bank account to fall back on. Applause rang out, but I wasn't done. True honor doesn't come from VIP seats or hollow praise. It comes when you know what you're living for, and you don't bow to those who want to see you crawl. I looked at Dylan, the man who never had to hide to make me proud. He nodded, eyes warmer than any spotlight. I've taken a long road to understand. I don't need validation from those who don't know real value, because I've proven it every day, through work, through study, and through how I love someone who never wears a mask. I bowed, not to ask permission, but to end with pride. And this time, the applause didn't just echo. It rang out. For the right person. After the ceremony, Dylan and I stood under the big maple tree in front of the auditorium. Strangers came up to shake hands, to praise, to hug me like they had known me forever. A freshman girl cried as she said, "You gave me hope that I don't have to be perfect to be worthy." I smiled and thanked each one. But then, I saw them. My parents were approaching, walking slower than usual. My mother still looked composed, not a wrinkle on her beige coat. My father, the man who hadn't looked me in the eye for a whole year, was now staring straight at me. "Catherine," my mother spoke first. "Yes." I remained calm. "We missed a lot," she said hesitantly. Something I'd never seen in her. I stayed silent. I didn't help her out of that awkwardness. My father continued, voice low. "Your speech made me reflect. Maybe I didn't understand you well enough." I looked at them, not angry, not ready to forgive, just tired. "I don't need you to understand, I just need you not to hurt me anymore." Dylan placed a hand on my shoulder, eyes wary. But I shook my head slightly. I would face my past on my own. My mother glanced at Dylan, then said, softly as wind, "We also haven't congratulated you two on the marriage and your careers." "Thank you," Dylan replied, polite but not warm. My father extended his hand. "Richard Miller, pleased to call you son-in-law." Dylan shook it, eyes steady. "We're hosting dinner at Willow Restaurant tonight," my mother said. "Just family, if you two would like to come." I looked at them. They weren't darkness anymore, but they weren't light either. "Thank you, but we already have plans tonight, with the people who've stood by me through it all." My mother nodded, no resistance. "Hopefully, there'll be another chance." For the first time they walked away not in anger or disappointment, but in quiet acceptance. And I stood there, no longer needing to brace myself, because I knew I hadn't changed to be loved. I had lived truthfully to be respected. We didn't go to the Willow Restaurant that night. Instead, Dylan took me to a small park by the lake, where rows of wooden tables were covered in white cloths, with homemade pastries and flowers in recycled glass jars. About 50 people were waiting, among the sound of jazz playing from a Bluetooth speaker and the scent of cinnamon cookies drifting in the air. They were the ones who truly witnessed my journey. Nurses from night shifts, classmates from study groups, Professor Rubin, even the bookstore owner where I used to work weekends. And in the center of it all was my grandmother, sitting in her wheelchair, face glowing like a street lamp. Congratulations, my little girl. Now no one can force you into their mold, right? No one anymore, I smiled, holding the frail but strongest hand I'd ever known. Dylan raised a glass of lemonade and stood before everyone. Thank you all for coming. We don't have champagne or diamond rings, but we have what's most valuable: truth, gratitude, and a future we built ourselves. I looked around, quietly. Each person at that gathering had appeared in a stage of my life that once seemed insignificant, but they were the real foundation, not flashy, but unshakable. A week later, Dylan and I moved into a small apartment in the south of the city. Not spacious, not fancy, but bright and full of sunlight. The dining set was secondhand that he'd repaired. The curtains I picked were lemon yellow because they looked cheerful. Every piece had our fingerprints on it. I started my new job at the Institute for Hospital Management Research, not mopping floors anymore, but designing cost-saving operational systems based on the very observations I once made during night shifts. And on that first morning as I brewed coffee, Dylan wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, "We don't need much, do we? No, just what's right." I nodded, looking out the window. Sunlight passed through the white curtains, warm and soft. At last, I was living as my true self, no roles, no masks, no permission needed. 3 months after graduation day, Dylan and I signed a 4-page document. At the top, in bold letters, the Walsh Carter Scholarship Fund for Working Students. No applause, no flashing cameras, just a simple law office, and my heart pounding steadily. "How many students do you think are juggling 3 jobs like I used to?" I asked. "Enough to prove that this so-called equality was never truly fair," Dylan replied, signing his name with a firm stroke. We began with our modest savings, along with an unexpected contribution from my grandmother, who quietly transferred a portion of her private estate into the fund, with a note that read, "This is the kind of legacy truly worthy of the Miller name." The scholarship would go to students working in service or healthcare, selected not by GPA, but by resilience, because I had once mopped hospital floors and still earned a 3.95 GPA, but I had also almost dropped out simply because I couldn't afford textbooks. At the private announcement event at Richmond, the dean stepped onto the stage with a genuine smile. Student Walsh didn't just leave behind achievements, but a path for others to follow, illuminated by truth, not inherited glory. I walked up, my hands slightly trembling, but not from fear, because I knew I was redefining what legacy meant. "I didn't come from poverty," I began. "I came from something worse, a wealthy family that didn't believe in their daughter if she chose a different path." My eyes scanned the crowd. A few students bowed their heads in tears. Some held up their phones to record. "This fund is for those who were once dismissed for wearing server uniforms, for walking in worn-out shoes, for not being able to call home for money. It's for those who have no one to back them except themselves." I paused for a beat, then said slowly, "Because I once was them." And for the first time in my life, I saw the Millers in the auditorium stand and applaud for something that didn't bear their name, but carried my soul. I used to think success meant a gold nameplate on a glass office door, a nod from my father, or a prestigious family, proud to mention my name at dinner. Now I know, success is brewing coffee for your husband on a Sunday morning in a tiny kitchen with no hired help but full of laughter. It's hearing a sophomore say, "I didn't drop out, I read your story." It's watching Dylan, the man who once knelt beside a leaking pipe in the hospital, sit in meetings with the National Healthcare Board, and still come home in time for dinner. It's being able to look back on the years I hand-washed laundry, slept on floors, scrubbed hospital tiles with old gloves, without resenting anyone. Because those were the very things that stripped away the false layers the Millers once wrapped around me. A year after graduation, I was invited back to Richmond to speak to incoming students. I stood in that lecture hall, the same space that had lifted me up and where I once sat exhausted. And I said, define success in a way that makes you proud, even if no one claps. Choose a path that lets you sleep well, without needing approval from anyone but yourself. I looked down at my hand. No more shaking. My ring finger still wore a simple wedding band, no diamonds, just a symbol of the right choice. Loving someone who didn't need to be flashy to shine. Success isn't the applause of those who once turned their backs. It's the silent respect when you rise and no one dares to stop you. No one calls me the disgrace of the Miller family anymore. They call me Catherine Walsh, the woman who created a light borrowed from no chandelier. And me? I call that freedom. I call that success. I call that a life worth living. Catherine Walsh's story isn't just a journey of overcoming family rejection. It's a powerful reminder that true success doesn't come from prestige or powerful relatives, but from inner strength and honesty. In real life, so many young people struggle between two paths, living by expectations or daring to follow their own. And just like Catherine, if you stay determined and brave, the light you create won't need to be borrowed from anyone. Because you, yourself, are already enough. What do you think about Catherine's journey? Would you make the same choice in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more moving stories about family and life.